So we might get started.
Yeah, it would be lovely to get started. And welcome to Margaret from Scotland as well. So we've got good representation, different parts of the world. And I think this is relevant because this is the topic of well-being is something that's kind of top of mind, I guess, for all of us at the moment, which is why we thought we'd just chat about it. And our plan is to maybe just start off by getting some views and perceptions from you, the attendees, the live attendees. Then Claudia and I will have a little bit of a discussion about how well-being is, coaching as a well-being enhancer, maybe share a few examples. And we do want to leave time. We've set aside 45 minutes for today. We do want to leave time for questions. So for any questions that you'd like Claudia or myself to address, please type those into the Q&A box. There's a question and answer box down there. We'll address those towards the end of our time together. So just to kick us off, if it's okay, I'd like to ask everyone here a question. Again, please type your answers into the chat box. The question we've got is, what have you learned about well-being during the last 18 months? So if I could ask you to type into the chat box, what have you learned about well-being over the last 18 months?
Great, Sonia. It's vital to everything we do as humans. I couldn't agree more. Dynamic, yes.
Yeah, Irene, thank you. Absolute equal focus on it in schools, equal to academics, yes.
Yeah. Connectivity, that comes up a lot. Yeah. Relationships. It's really interesting, these things, connectivity, relationships, these are the foundational parts of coaching, aren't they, Christian?
They are. And I love Sarah saying in work, it requires a team approach. That's a really interesting thing to think about. It's not an individual thing, but it can be aided through a team approach. It can't be taken for granted, Melinda says. And I don't know if others on this call would agree, but I think maybe we had been taking it for granted a little bit prior to this pandemic. Isolated from others has a big impact on our well-being. And, you know, my empathy to those who are in various forms of lockdown in different parts of the world, that's one of the things we noticed during lockdowns, is that feeling of, you know, imposed isolation can have a big impact. Craig, thanks, all about relationships.
Yeah, that's
and
coming
Craig
up a bit.
And James, almost at the same time saying it's all about relationships, knowing each other. That idea about students and staff as well.
Yeah. And I'll just pick up on, Trudy, what you've said, looking after our own well-being so we can look after others, because Christian and I actually had a discussion about this and we thought we'd answer that question ourselves. And that was the first thing I actually put on my list. What I've learned in this last 18 months is actually start with your own well-being. So there's a real importance there about, and, you know, switching off from work, and that balance or harmony seems a theme that seems to be coming through as well.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I know Susan's connecting from South Africa. The importance of being real. You know, now that we've highlighted the importance of relationships, and it has come up a lot, hasn't it? I think that thinking about how do we need to be so that we can relate better, and maybe something about that genuine, the authenticity, that's part of it. And, you know, actually, Claudia and I, in planning this, we haven't got a detailed script we wanted to go through because we did want it to be very real. So yeah, Claudia, you were saying, what was the thing that you've learned?
I've learned that self-care, first of all. I've actually learned we don't actually need as much as we thought we did in regards to material things. And I've learned switching off from work is really important, particularly if you're working remotely, which most of us are, and having those boundaries between work and home, because we're working from home now. Giving myself permission to do things for my well-being. without feeling any guilt, ensuring that it's intentional in the day. And actually what it's made me realize is more time to reignite things that I'm passionate about. So it's
wonderful.
been really lovely. How about you, Christian? What have you learned?
Yeah, I think along similar lines, I think the giving permission to oneself to say, well, I really need to look after my well-being now. Given how challenging things are, that's definitely one thing. The other thing is it's to do with some of the comments about not taking things for granted. And I do think that applies to relationships. And in the pre-COVID times, it's almost like I felt I hadn't been investing enough in relationships intentionally, because, you bump into people, you see people regularly. I think this period has made me realize you have to actually reach out, and you have to be trying to stay connected and be intentional about investing in relationships.
Yeah.
So there has been a lot of learning, and my hope is that we don't lose sight of some of these things we're saying.
Yeah.
Once the pandemic has receded, and particularly that thing about the equality of well-being and academics, as one of our participants mentioned, wouldn't it be good if we could keep that lens to say, look, they're both incredibly important.
Yeah.
But Claudia, let's move on to talk about some of our thoughts. And thank you for commentary about chairs and things.
Yeah, Rex, that's a great comment.
It's my well-being. It's a well-being chair, let's say. So when Claudia and I were thinking about this, and Claudia has been arguing for some time that coaching and well-being are so connected, haven't you? So we wanted to split that to say that when we think about coaching and well-being, we can think of it in terms of explicit coaching conversations, which have as a purpose to enhance well-being. So it would be, for example, Claudia and I having a coaching conversation about what can I do to look after my well-being, or to enhance my well-being, or to recover my well-being. That would be one route. But Claudia and I also think that the process of coaching in itself, whether or not the topic is well-being, can enhance well-being. So I don't know, where would you like to start with that, Claudia? I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, I think there's two kind of streams of thinking there that Christian and I had really thought about, that came to the fore. And that first one was about that intentionality. So actually coaching people around well-being. I think that proactive way is really important. It could be, it doesn't have to be lengthy and ongoing, but one of the things that Christian and I spoke about was using coaching to intentionally improve well-being as a focus. And the second one, which is probably where we'll spend a little bit more time on today, is about coaching in itself as an intervention will improve or boost well-being. There's a couple of things that coaching is underpinned by that naturally actually enhance relationships and well-being. It's goal-orientated, it's action-orientated by nature, coaching, and it's solution-focused and forward-focused. So we're always trying to look for what's wanted. And in itself, as an intervention, that's already positive, isn't it, Christian?
It is, and it does link to a couple of theories, doesn't it? It links to Richard Boyatzis's intentional change theory. And that's something worth for educators maybe to have a look at, intentional change theory by Richard Boyatzis. On the other one is hope theory, which comes from the University of Kansas, Snyder and Lopez. And Claudia, I know you've got some thoughts about how that's an example that coaching and hope theory are pretty interlinked. Do you want to say something about that?
And another Richard Snyder and Lopez, as you said. Hope theory, I think, is really integral to coaching. The research behind that says that high hopers naturally have higher levels of well-being anyway. But what's important and how it links to coaching is that coaching is goal and action oriented, as I said, and the three primary components of hope theory are goal thinking. So we want people to be, we want to support them around being goal orientated in their thoughts. So that's one of the tenets there, and which is really the G part of our growth framework. That's what we're trying to support our coachees and our clients to do. The second part is pathway thinking. So it's that developing strategies that will support their goals. So it's that pathway thinking, and that relates to the options part of our growth framework. So we want people to be able to think in multiple pathways to support our goal attainment. And then the final one is agency thinking. So that's really important, because that's your belief in your capacity to be able to achieve your goal. And really the whole concept of coaching is to be able to support goal attainment of the people we work with. And I would relate that to the H part, the habits part of coaching, because it's that sustainability part. Would you agree, Christian?
Yeah, I can see, one way of thinking about coaching in itself is it is a process that is designed to increase hopefulness. I mean, that's one way of thinking about what is this endeavor about. And so when we as educators get together and think about what are the outcomes we want from coaching, it's very interesting, because I don't know what everyone on this call, how everyone is using it, but often the objectives of coaching can be, to greater attainment, building confidence. It can be about empowering people, but it's almost like one of the side effects is well-being, isn't it?
Yes.
And because let's say somebody's goal is about better academic achievement, the process, like you said, of setting a goal, of considering what resources they have, of coming up with their own solutions, of being supported to think about what it is they need to do. And then the idea of self-efficacy comes in here, then seeing that they're making progress. All of this is incredibly important for us as human beings in terms of our development, but also our well-being. I do think it supports our well-being to be making progress towards goals that are self-selected goals that are important to us.
There's a lovely empowerment in coaching conversations that I don't know very many conversations have in such a powerful way. And the way we connect with people in coaching and support them and support their goals that they're working towards in a non-judgmental way, I think is such a powerful way to be able to support and boost people's well-being while they're working towards whatever goal it is that they're working towards. And, that goes back to your concept, Christian, of, that coaching way of being that we talk about a lot. And one of the things is that non-judgment. So I think that in itself, being non-judgmental in these professional developmental conversations is a well-being booster. How wonderful to have a conversation with a colleague where you're truly supported and not judged.
Yeah. And, one thing for us on this call to think about is thinking about the impact of coaching on our well-being, maybe both as coach and coachee, because what you're saying, Claudia, there, that's a nice conversation to be part of, whether you're the coach and you're seeing the other person grow and it came up a lot in our responses to the questions, but the most compelling evidence that supports the use of coaching shows that it's that perceived quality of the relationship between the coach and coachee, which is so important. So, when we were talking about this current pandemic having an isolating effect for many reasons, the opportunity to have meaningful conversations with colleagues and others, I think that's good for the well-being of both the coach and the coachee. But I don't know, what do you think about that?
I completely agree. I think there's an amazing reciprocity in coaching. As you're coaching someone and you're supporting them in their goal attainment, and it's increasing their well-being as they're moving towards that, there's a reciprocity that myself as a coach my well-being is improved because as you said, I can see the strides my colleague or my client is making. But the other thing that is improved is things like I'm noticing more, I'm listening in a deeper way, I'm asking better questions. So I'm actually increasing my skills and my well-being as a coach. So there's this amazing reciprocity in coaching conversations that I think really is powerful for both the coach and the coachee.
And, you know, as we're talking, and this is why conversations like this are lovely, Claudia, is I'm just thinking that from a coach perspective, and most of us on this call are educators as well. I believe that adding value is important to us. You know, I think as educators, most people probably have gotten into this because in one way or another, they want to add value. And you know, the pandemic in some instances has probably interfered with our ability to add value in the way that we normally like to add value. So I'm just thinking that sense that we're actually adding value and helping people to feel valued during this time might be even more important. And you know, I'm thinking personally, in moments where I've been coaching others, I have felt, oh, I'm still doing something that's of value. Even when, I work for GCI, but I was also working for a university. For example, I wasn't able to go and teach in person, but the coaching always made me feel, you know, I'm still adding value.
Yeah.
What about you, Claudia?
Yeah, I mean, it made me, this week I was running an online workshop, our coaching accreditation program, with some wonderful educators from Australia and New Zealand, and they were going in and out of the breakout rooms to do some coaching. And great story, somebody came back and said how powerful that just that 15 minutes, they're in a breakout room 15 minutes practicing coaching, how powerful just to be with someone for that period of time, and that person is completely invested in what you're saying and completely invested in supporting you. So it just reminds me of how powerful coaching can be, just even in short spurts, you know. And these are people who are complete strangers who are paired together on one of our programs, but they could see the immediacy of what coaching can do just by being present and actively listening and being supportive. So I think there's a real power and an intimacy in a way. Even though they're doing it virtually, there was still intimacy. So it's really quite amazing, actually.
It is, and I'm glad you've talked about that kind of the ability for us to build connection. I think it's a human ability to build connection. Like you said, with this cohort that you're working with, maybe they don't even know each other before the course, but I think coaching gives us the tools to build those kind of strong connections.
Yeah.
And I think that's just such a great example of the value of just being listened to. And I'm thinking, this pandemic is one that we're facing globally. So everybody, whether they kind of acknowledge it, to what level they acknowledge it, we're all affected by this. And I do think I would consider this to be a kind of a long-term traumatic experience that we're all having. It is traumatic. We're losing things that we normally had. We don't have the connections we normally had. And so I think people are experiencing things maybe they haven't experienced before, frustrations, hopes, etc. So I do think we want to be listened to. So when we can find somebody out there, like you said, and it is the quality of the listening that matters, Claudia.
Yes, it is.
It's not, well, that's what I've experienced. And it's actually somebody taking the time to say, well, tell me about how are you experiencing this? And I do think that adds value in that people can express how they're feeling and thinking and experiencing. But crucially for our conversation, it's good for the well-being of that person, the person who's being coached, but probably also good for the well-being of the coach as well.
Most definitely.
Because we're all in it together. That's the amazing thing here. The ability for us to be empathetic is probably higher now than it's ever been.
And I completely agree. And I think, connectivity is a primary human motivating factor, isn't it? I mean, self-determination theory talks about that.
Yeah.
You know, one of our motivating factors as humans is that we like to be connected. We like that sense of autonomy. We want a sense of achievement, but that connectivity is really crucial. And people are finding new ways to do that, obviously online, but I think coaching is a deeper conversation. And what's really important for me about coaching is the intention that you go in with. So if you're using coaching in your context as a coach, having the right intention when you go into that conversation, and the intention is I'm having this coaching relationship or having this coaching conversation to support the other, not to try and drive my own agenda, but it's truly and authentically about you and what you want and supporting you to work towards your goals. That's when I think we improve well-being, and there's that reciprocity. So I think it's being mindful of intention going into the conversation. That's really important.
Yeah, definitely. And the intention as it's perceived by the person receiving whatever it is, the intervention, because, you know, as we think about what can we do in our organizations to support well-being, I think there's a risk of us being prescriptive, isn't there? There's a risk when we're thinking about people's well-being to say, look, we're going to do this. You have to do this, sign up for this, learn this. Whereas what we're saying in this conversation is one of the most respectful ways of supporting somebody's well-being is simply to say, how are you coping? What would be helpful for your well-being? And to make sure that we don't lose sight of the autonomy that we know is essential, so that it's almost, I think, coaching for well-being is a kind of a process of co-constructing a strategy that's good for somebody's well-being, and it's not prescriptive. I would kind of push back against somebody coaching me and saying, oh, well, in that case, Christian, you need to do this and this, and that'll boost your well-being. I think what will boost well-being is that ability to design something that actually is going to work for me, because I know myself and I know what resources are around. Now, you know, our good colleagues, Professor Susie Green and Clive Leach, they're colleagues and friends, they've done a lot of work on this. And just thinking, I want to connect it to PERMA now. And they've written something about how Martin Seligman's well-being framework, that's called the PERMA framework, and we'll explain it in a moment. They've written about how that well-being framework and coaching are pretty well aligned. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the space I love to work in is the integration of coaching and positive psychology. There's an absolute synergy there. You know, Dr. Susie Green, who's a wonderful colleague and practitioner, calls coaching a well-being amplifier. I love that. So it's a well-being amplifier. And if we look at PERMA, which is an acronym, as you said, it's a framework. Each part of that links to coaching. So if you think of P, which is around positive emotions, you know, a lot of work done there is Barbara Fredrickson's work on, you know, positive emotions and, you know, her broaden and build theory. But I think about how coaching does produce positive emotions, not happiness. We're not talking about happiness. Barbara Fredrickson talks about things like, you know, hope or curiosity. You know, by nature, I think coaching is curious. You know, we ask curious questions, which supports deeper and broader thinking. And then there's, I'll let you talk about some of the other parts of PERMA. There's 5-6 parts there.
There are. So there's the engagement part. So according to this theory, people need to be highly engaged in order to experience flourishing or thriving. Relationships comes up. And actually, Claudia, I've looked at quite a few well-being theories, and relationships is in every one of them. So if there's one thing we can take away for sure, is, I think, leveraging relationships to support our own well-being. And, you know, when we think about resilience, it's not an individual thing. You know, it's how do we harness our networks, our resources, our relationships to help us get through things. It's got meaning and purpose. That's the M in PERMA. So reminding people about their meaning or their purpose can be helpful. And then it's got the A, which is accomplishment. So according to Seligman, if you have those 5 components, you're more likely to experience flourishing or high levels of well-being. So I'm just conscious of the time. I do want to leave time for questions, etc. So should we just spend a little bit of time thinking about what practical ways people can apply some of this thinking?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I do in my practice is, I love that concept of noticing. So whenever I start a conversation, I notice, and even virtually, you can still pick up really good body language. I notice where my coachee is at. I had a coachee a few weeks ago. The first thing they did when they came into the coaching conversation was this. So that to me is a sign. Before we jump into the coaching, there's, it was a deep sigh. So I said, I just want to check in before we jump into the coaching. Are you okay? How are you feeling? We just took the first 5 minutes and then, they were able to put whatever was on their mind, they were able to put that aside so we could actually then focus on the coaching. Had we jumped right into the coaching, we might have had a different outcome or a different kind of dynamic in the conversation. So I want to always acknowledge what I'm hearing and seeing. Noticing the body language, I think, is really important. The mood, noticing yourself as well. Are you prepared when you go in as a coach for the conversation? Are you taking 5 or 10 minutes before you start your coaching conversations to ensure you're in the moment and in the flow of the coaching session and putting aside whatever's going on? And another thing which is really important is slowing down the conversation when needed, and the power of the pause, which we talk a lot about. Pausing and allowing for silence and allowing my coachee time to think, versus jumping in and trying to give the answer or direct the conversation in another way, which we wouldn't do. So, and I think they're really important, pausing and noticing and allowing for silence.
Yeah, and Claudia, even as you talked about the sigh, I just thought of possible responses. One is to notice it and adapt our questions accordingly. How are you? The other is to also sigh. I think kind of mirror it back. Just take a breathe out as well.
Yeah, doing that as you're doing it.
Yeah. And because it allows us to calm down as well, but or to ask about it. So tell me about. I've just heard you breathe out. Tell me about that, because even the sigh could be one of relief, could be one of frustration. So it's a kind of a tell me about something that's real for you, because it's obviously real. They're experiencing it. I think you're right. Simply being curious about somebody's experience. Such a mind shift, isn't it? From not trying. So a teacher comes in, I'm going to coach them, big sigh. I can understand we want to help them. We want to give them an idea of, hey, why don't you take a bit of a break? Why don't you do? I think rather than that, the stance of curiosity and respect of, so what is it like to be you? What is kind of going on?
Yeah.
And I think the kind of the strengths-based questioning that would come to my mind after that would be, when have you overcome challenges like that before? Because in our growth framework, the R isn't just reality, it's resources.
That's right. That's right.
What resources do you have? So reminding people of resources, thinking down the PERMA model, what sort of things give you joy could be a question. Because according to the PERMA model, experiencing positive emotion is good for our well-being. And we can be going through very difficult times, and yet there are those moments of joy, aren't there, Claudia?
Most definitely.
I remember when I was locked down in the UK, we had a pretty extended lockdown at one point. I almost felt guilty, Claudia, for having those moments of joy, because there was so much difficulty all around. But I would go out on a walk in nature and then just see a robin or a little bird. And it was a joyful moment. And for some reason, initially, I was thinking, I can't feel joy right now, all this terrible. But actually, it was important to embrace that, because even within these moments of difficulty, it might be a conversation with a loved one, it might be a Zoom conversation with a colleague. Those moments of joy are important. And then other questions like, what are you passionate about? To connect people, to increase their engagement.
Yes.
Who can you call on? Helping people to connect with others. So I do think we can build in some of these questions into our coaching practice. So that's one angle. But Claudia, just on that other thing, we mentioned it already, and you've alluded to it, our own levels of well-being. Tell me a little bit about your thinking. What do we need to do as coaches around our own well-being before we're coaching others?
I think in my own practice, I always take time before I start a coaching session. I don't go from one meeting and jump straight into a coaching session. I like to be prepared when I go into the session. I read over my notes. I get myself orientated to what's going to be happening in the session, because I think coaching is a very respectful conversation, and I want to be able to respect the person that I'm having that conversation with and be present for them. I know it's not always possible, but not having meetings back to back, education is a very fast-paced environment, and sometimes that's just not possible. So when people say that's a great idea, Claudia, but I don't have 15 minutes in between every session, or sometimes I don't even have 15 minutes, I would say take a few minutes, take a deep breath, get yourself prepared. Minimize distractions is another one I think is really important, because again, if my focus is on you as a coach, I need to minimize any distractions around me so I can be focused on you in a really authentic way and be present. I think they're really, really important. And then I actually also take time after. I know it's very indulgent, but take time after the coaching session, just 5 minutes to do what we call being a reflective practitioner. Just reflect on the session, what went well, you know, how could I support my coachee? What might I change or do differently? So we're always having to reflect on what we do. And I think whether you're using coaching in a formal way or an informal way through a coaching approach, reflecting on your own practice is crucial in helping your development, I think, as a coach. But it also is a way to boost your well-being, because you're noticing things that you do well. So what went well, you know, it could be, I asked really open, solution-focused questions, or what went well was I didn't jump in and give them the answer if that's my kind of default. And you're noticing things about yourself that you're doing well. So they're the kind of things that I look at.
I know it feels indulgent, but like you're saying, it isn't actually an indulgence at this time to look after our well-being. And yeah, schools are very busy places where it doesn't have to be big chunks of time, but I do think that idea, even very briefly, just taking a moment to stop before you go into that conversation and taking a brief moment. You know, one thing that I think could transform meetings, because many of these now happen on Zoom or Teams or other platforms. I want, you know, something like if meetings are usually an hour, I think maybe make them 45 minutes. If they're usually 30 minutes, make them 25, just to allow for that transition time. And the reason I'm saying this ties into what we've been saying, is the need for us to be intentional about our well-being. We need to, I think our energy levels, particularly in education, which consistently is underappreciated in most of our societies. Many people don't really understand what it's like to be an educator. During these times, I think our energy is getting depleted at a higher rate. And in our normal everyday interactions prior to COVID, we were getting the things we needed to boost our energy. You know, at the end of the day, maybe you go out and have a drink with colleagues, or those incidental conversations. We're not getting those as much. So I think being intentional about saying, I'm just going to allow myself time to just boost myself, get a little bit of energy. What went well in that conversation? What did I do that was helpful? I think those things can make a really big difference, Claudia.
Yeah. Do you think how we've got about just under 10 minutes left? We've got some questions here in the Q&A box, but I'm also just having a quick look at the chat box. There's a lot of
I'm loving what's in the chat box. I'm loving what's in the chat box as well. Looking after our own well-being so we can look after others. I think that's essential.
Well, I actually think it's critical. You know, you can't give to others if you're depleted. You know, so part of that is energy management, time management. There's lots of
Yeah.
things that go into that, but I think going in intentional and prepared. And the thing about coaching, which we know from a lot of our training that we do, it doesn't have, we do 1 hour coaching sessions. It doesn't have to be 1 hour, a 15-minute intentional coaching conversation that's very targeted can be just as effective as a 1 hour conversation. But I think it's about that intention. And you said something really important before, Christian, about the autonomy of the person we're working with. I think that's really critical. And I think that's how coaching can be respectful and how it boosts well-being, because we are allowing for these things that actually underpin what motivates us as humans. So we're boosting that naturally through the conversations.
Thank you.
So any questions that
Absolutely.
we've got here?
So, and also an invitation to everyone right now, if there is a question that's popped into your head as we've been talking, please do post the question. I noticed that Nicole was commenting how important it is well-being, in other words, in all aspects of our lives, definitely. Dawn, thank you for being here. Dawn is a researcher and an educator, saying that well-being is really kind of central to everything. And just on that point, I think, thinking about being educators as well, and I just want to say how much I appreciate all educators and leaders and everyone else who's linked to this field. But my sense is people are learning from educators all the time, not just when we teach. So I wonder if there's, during challenging times like this, this is a question I would pose to you. If you were an educator or an educational leader and you thought, I want to lead by example of looking after my well-being during a pandemic, my question to you is, what sort of things would you be doing? Because remember, the students are seeing this, your colleagues are seeing it, parents, other carers. So that would be a question that I'd like to leave people with, is if you were to kind of think, I want to role model a positive engagement with well-being during this time, what would that be? So John's asked, how does a coaching relationship work to enhance well-being? I think we've addressed that a little bit in our conversation. Claudia, do you want to add something to that?
No, but I would add he's asked 2 questions. The second question is, what is intrinsic to the coaching relationship that enhances well-being? And I think what's intrinsic to coaching relationships is that they're respectful, they're curious, they're supportive, they're non-judgmental, they're patient. We should be patient. There's a level of privacy and confidentiality that is intrinsic and important, which I think builds not only well-being, it builds rapport, which feeds into that. So there's lots, and I could keep going. There's lots and lots of components of coaching that are intrinsic, and I think the most important one is that it is focused on the other.
Yeah,
we're in coaching, we're focused on the other, and it's incredibly supportive.
And one interesting thing just to build on there, Claudia, and thanks, John, for the question, is that perhaps one way to look after our well-being, one way, is the focus on the other. And so perhaps as educators and coaches, by focusing on supporting the well-being of others, we may also be supporting our own well-being. Wendy's asked a question about energy management and tips for energy management. So I think this idea of energy is important. As human beings, we have limited, all human beings, we have limited amounts of energy. So I think one strategy is simply to be aware and notice, that come back to that word that Claudia used, notice our levels of energy and maybe draw a little map. I've sometimes with coachees, I've asked them to think, could you draw kind of an energy map, a typical energy map during the day, maybe a typical energy map on a Monday. And just first of all, be alert to when do we have the most energy and how should we deploy it and what time should we be doing different things. The other is, I think, to build in times intentionally that are downtime,
Yeah.
because the whole idea of managing energy is recognizing that it's a finite resource. So for educators, my question to you is where is that time? When do you build it in? Because if you're on Zoom all day as an educator, and then you switch to, now I'm a member of a family or other kind of a unit, when is that time for kind of recharging? And is it regular? And I've tried this before. I worked with some school leaders, and we were looking at their electronic diaries. And I said, when have you allocated time for reflection and rest? And hardly anybody does. It's kind of the in-between things that they can get filled up. So one practical thing, Wendy, is for us, maybe even in our diaries, to say, this is protected time. This is time for me to reflect, take a bit of a walk. Perhaps, I don't know, any other ideas, Claudia, about managing energy?
Yeah, we've been doing at GCI, we've been doing walk and talk meetings. So when it's not necessary to be in front of a screen or have to look at any sort of data, we've been taking our meetings, we just sort of put our headphones in and we do a 30-minute walk, and we have the conversation that way. So we're out in nature, we're exercising, we're walking, we're away from a screen. And that actually does help with your energy management, because you're getting a little bit of a boost before you come back. And if you have to, you know, especially if you're sitting and doing long screen time. So I think, yeah, that's really important. We've got a few more minutes. We've got...
Yeah, just if I may add to that, and I will respond to Irene's as well, a question. You know, one of the things I'm interested in at the moment is what's called lifestyle medicine. And lifestyle medicine has a number of pillars of, you know, things that you can do that is actually thing to support healthy living. And one of them is sleep, you know, and there's a lot of evidence about the quantity and quality of sleep. So I think in relation to energy management, one thing we can all do is be more proactive about thinking, do I have the right routines? Am I getting sound sleep? And what can I do to increase the amount of sleep I get? That has a big impact, not only on our energy levels during the day, but on our well-being as well. So maybe looking into things like that. And there are practical things. Please don't take your mobile phone to bed. Please don't do that, because it's distracting, it's blue light, it raises our energy levels. It's going to be tough, because during a pandemic, it's normal for us to want data. It's normal for us to want, I need to be looking at what are the numbers saying, what's the pandemic doing? But you don't have to do that before you go to bed, and you don't have to do it first thing when you wake up. I think just changing that tiny habit to say, I'm going to look at the phone at 9 a.m. or I'm going to look at it at 5 p.m. before I start winding down. Little things like that can make a big difference. So on to Irene's question, and then we do want to wrap up. I want to respect everyone's time here as well. There's a fine line between being a coach and being qualified to support mental health. Where is the line drawn? Is it okay if I pass that over to you, Claudia, initially? I've got a few thoughts.
So that's a great question, Irene. I think coaching, to be clear, is not counselling, for sure. And we do need to be very clear up front. We talk about contracting in coaching, which is really critical. So talking about what the conversation in the relationship is and what it isn't, what your role as a coach is. So I think being really clear up front is critical. Also, if things come up in the conversation that are clearly outside your area of expertise or you're uncomfortable with, I would pause the conversation. It could be a referral. I would say, look, I'm noticing this is, going outside the scope of what we've discussed. Oh, this sounds really important to you, but it's not something I would be able to support you in, or I'm not qualified in. Like you would in other things, I think, in your roles. If you're not qualified, it's outside your area of expertise, you feel uncomfortable, refer on. But the most critical part is the contracting, I think, in coaching relationships. So upfront, people know what they can and should be bringing to coaching. But if we do notice things going on, I would always pause and say, do you need to stop? Is there someone else you might need to speak to? Even though my background is in psychology, I would always still be really clear about the boundaries of the conversation, and first and foremost, the well-being of the person I'm working with, and knowing when to pause and refer.
That's great, Claudia. And I wanted to pass that question to you because I know you've been a counselor yourself, and that boundary is important. So just to wrap that up, what I would say is, I think it's always helpful to give time to listen to others. So I think that's something we should do without being too worried about starting those conversations. But it is that thing of knowing when to refer, to say, well, you've started talking about something where there's a mental health professional might be better placed to support you with that. But I want to reiterate that one thing that I think we can all do is listen to one another, check in with one another. How are you tracking? How are things going? Do you have everything that you need around you? And that's bringing that human connection back, isn't it? It's the connecting, even in the face of a pandemic. The last thing I'll say is, I've been really from the outset upset that we've called this social distancing or whatever, because it's physical distancing. That's the thing that's been required. Socially, we should be more connected than we've ever been. So I would encourage more social connection, looking for opportunities just to check in with somebody. It could be a text message. It could be a small WhatsApp thing. It could be a little message on a chat board. But how are you doing? Such an important question to be asking. And Claudia, thank you for your time today and for having this conversation. As always, I've really enjoyed the conversation. And I'm so appreciative of everybody who's taken time to join us for this call today. But as we said, I think let's try and wrap up now. Claudia, are you okay to do that?
Yes, I want to thank everyone who's come from all different parts. I know there's some odd times people are getting up, so really appreciative. I hope that this has resonated, and the importance of coaching conversations and how they can boost well-being. There's a great connection there, and I hope it's resonated for you and that it's given you some food for thought.
And even bigger hope for everybody. And I am very naive, everybody knows this, naive and optimistic and all of that. But my hope is that even this conversation has led to a little bit of connection for us, that it's been good to take some time just to think about our well-being. And we don't need permission to think about, to prioritize our well-being, I think. So let's do as much of the looking after our own well-being as possible. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.